Hi everyone, you're very welcome to the Higher Education Authority Education for Sustainable Development Spotlight Series. We're in week 9 of the Spotlight Series, and I'm delighted that today we have Trinity College Dublin who are going to be sharing some of their ESD practice. My name is Mark Kelly and I'm currently on secondment with the Higher Education Authority as a National Policy Advisor on Education for Sustainability. So for today's session, if you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask the team that are presenting today, please put them in the chat, or if you don't have access to the chat, please put them in to the Q&A, and we'll be keeping an eye on those and coming to them towards the end of the session today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Claire, who's going to introduce the speakers, and really looking forward to this. So thanks to everybody for taking the time to prepare and present today. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you to you and colleagues at the HEA National Forum for the invitation to speak today and to share with you the work from the team at Trinity. We're delighted to be here. I'm just going to do very quick introductions and then hand over. I'm based in the Centre for Academic Practice as an academic developer, and I work alongside Dr. Caitríona, who's going to be speaking in a few moments, and both of us are involved in the ESD work at Trinity College Dublin. Also with us in the room today, we have some of our ESD fellows, so I think cameras are enabled there and they can say quick hi and wave. We have Dr. Kushla Ford, who's just very recently joined us as an ESD fellow, Dr. Cecily Roach, who will be speaking a little bit later on today, who's been working on this area for quite a long time, and Dr. John Gallagher as well, who will be speaking later today. And we'll be joined a little later in the session by Dr. Jonathan Hodgers, who's going to present some work from the discipline of music, and who's also recently joined us as an ESD fellow. And I can see we have with us here as well today Dr. Pauline Rooney, who's the head of the Centre for Academic Practice at Trinity. So Pauline is there with us as well. So welcome everyone, and we're delighted to be with you today. Our running order, first of all, Dr. Caitríona will present on some of the context and the ESD framework we've developed. Then Cecily Roach will be presenting some of the work that's been done in collaboration with Trinity Business School, and we have included Dr. Nora Campbell as a speaker, although she can't actually be with us today. So we will hear more about that shortly. Then John will present some of the work on mapping that's ongoing, and Jonathan then will present some of the work from music. So without further ado, if I can hand over to you, Caitríona, and we'll start off. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, Claire, and thanks to the National Forum for inviting us along. So here I have been asked to speak to the curriculum design framework that we've developed, and I see here a rather long title on my very hopefully short presentation. But what I want to do first is just give a little bit of background as to what ESD looks like in Trinity. And I suppose to begin with, if we look at our sustainability strategy, the education pillar of the sustainability strategy states that Trinity would aim to empower students and staff to develop the knowledge and skills to become, I suppose, future sustainable sustainable citizens. And in particular, then our focus is on that the Trinity Curriculum will facilitate students to develop the key competencies required, and will provide professional development for teaching staff to enable that. So how did this come about and what's happened so far? Well, as we're all aware here, the HEA SATL funding from 2022 had an Education for Sustainable Development strand. And from that strand, there were 5 fellows appointed in May 2023. And those fellows were all from the academic community across Trinity. And they essentially started to look at what might ESD or what might embedding ESD look like in a Trinity context. And out of that, one of the major works, which Cecily will outline later, is the pilot model that was developed enacting sustainable development. And that module has been completed by over 40 academic teaching staff from a teaching perspective. And then over 500 first-year undergraduate business students have completed the module. And Cecily will talk specifically about that. As part of that, we are developing OERs coming out of that work as well. So this fellows initiatives are continuing, and also then John, joined by myself and Claire, as she outlined, from the Centre for Academic Practice. And we have outlined 7 work packages for 2025. And these include the mapping exercises, which John will brief you on, the professional development and curriculum redesign, and I'll just talk about the framework in that regard, and Cecily will talk about the professional development, or some of, and dissemination. And so far this year, we've had a series of workshops and community of practice events since January. So we've certainly got going on this end of things. So the ESD team has evolved and over time, so you can see pictures there, I think, of almost everyone who's been involved. So currently the fellows are Cecily Roach, John Gallagher, Cushla Ford, and Jonathan Hodgers, as Claire outlined. I see also, I think, in there that Claire Kelly, who's pictured up there to the right, is actually joined us today. So Claire Kelly is a previous fellow, and it's great to see her here. And Pauline Rooney is director of the project, and Nicola Byrne has managed it. And I also see that Professor Jane Stout has joined us today, and she's the project sponsor. So it's great to have everyone here. So how is ESD envisaged, and how do we look at it from a Trinity perspective? So a lot of this work is based on the work that the fellows started in May 2023, looking at the literature, looking at what happened out there, what other universities are doing. And it was decided to focus then on these kind of 4 areas in our framework: the themes, the competencies, the pedagogical approaches, and the teaching, learning, and assessment strategies. And we went for ESD themes rather than the 17 sustainability goals to reflect the wedding cake that Rangstrom, and now I forget the other guy's name, developed in Stockholm. And I think John is going to speak a bit more about that later on, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but we're focusing on themes rather than goals. We've selected to work with the UNESCO key competencies, which, as I've outlined there on page 10 of the document below, and to use the pedagogical approaches that they have found that can support the development of these, that can be used to support the teaching and learning in the development of these competencies. And then we've looked at and examined a number of teaching, learning, and assessment strategies that have been used in many different contexts to see which ones that we can enact using the pedagogical approaches, or making sure that we are bringing along those approaches with us. And just to kind of unpack that a little bit more, our idea here is that in order for, to consider how we will design programs and modules to embed ESD, we consider it a sort of a jigsaw. All 4 pieces really need to be there, and that's our end desire. So we would be saying that the competencies have to be developed in the context of these ESD teams. So if you're developing critical thinking, it has to be in the context of some of the themes, and also that the teaching, learning, and assessment strategies will be enacted in line with the 3 pedagogical approaches. So if you are using something like, for example, systems mapping, you should have a learner-centered approach. It should be an action-orientated learning, and ideally then be transformative, which, as we know, can be difficult to achieve, but at least we can begin that transformation process. And I think Cecily again will speak a little bit more about that later on. So that's essentially the framework that we envisage that we'll use to support staff when they're embedding ESD into their program and modules. Along with that, and sort of at the same time as that was developing, we developed a resource hub on the Centre for Academic Practice web pages. And that hub, I've just lost my screen here, so this is a bit on the fly. That hub is available up on our Centre for Academic Practice website there. And there are a number of sections covering things like the competencies and how to develop learning outcomes to support those competencies. We also have a quick start guide there with one quick thing that in order for academics who aren't ready to redesign their whole module, they can just do a few ideas there how they can embed ESD or begin to embed ESD. And then finally, what we're going forward with now from that work is we're looking at developing toolkits from various curriculum design workshops that we're trialing, and developing professional development opportunities based on the OERs and enhancing our resource hub. We're also engaging with program teams and module leaders to see how we can support them. And yeah, that's essentially how we're going forward. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'll hand over back to Claire, or to John, I think, next.
And we're actually going to go next to Cecily. So I think, Cecily, if you go ahead and share, it will automatically take away the share from Caitríona there.
Great. Thanks very much, Caitríona and Claire. You can see my slides.
Coming up there. We go. Perfect. Thanks
right.
a million.
Well, thanks to Caitríona and to Claire. It gives me the greatest of pleasure to present on the Enacting Education for Sustainable Development modules and the link and the background to the rollout of the Trinity Business School module. As mentioned, Nora can't make it today, but she's certainly with us in spirit. And lest there be any doubt, a mix of Nora's capabilities and absolute courage underpin being able to roll this out so quickly as a mandatory module in the School of Business for all incoming students to all 5 programs in September 2024. So what I want to share with you is some of the background to that, how we got to that stage, and indeed plans for next steps. The acknowledgements include not just the ESD fellows or the broader ESD team, but multiple other students and staff who got involved, gave us feedback, attended beta testing sessions, etc. And of course, all those in the Trinity Business School, not just those directly involved with the module, but for the courage to commit before we even had a module to deliver beginning last September. How did we get here? It was absolutely underpinned by a partnership approach. So yes, Trinity advertised in early 23 for academics to apply to be seconded as ESD fellows. We began around about May 2023 with a relatively blank page. Other than Trinity knew they wanted every student to experience ESD from within their discipline and with an interdisciplinary element, and that whatever was done, those students would experience it in the context of Trinity's 4 existing graduate attributes. And as mentioned earlier, of course, it was also partnership with Centre for Academic Practice, Pauline, our program manager, TTNL, and of course the sponsor, Professor Jane Stout, and the entire Sustainability Office team. So very quickly, we had appointed student interns, also interdisciplinary, by October of that year. And around about October 23, we also realised the absolute commitment of Trinity Business School to partner with us, not just in the context of Nora, but also Declan Cahill, who's coordinator of their team of workshop leaders, because they already took a very small group workshop approach to how they enacted any of their modules. So it was a wonderful partnership from the beginning. But to clarify also that this didn't just appear out of nowhere, as it were. We all know that aligning with existing strategic plans, as appeared in Trinity's own 2025 strategic plan. We've heard how the sustainability strategy aligned directly with that, and indeed with national strategy and UN strategy. And the specific education pillar that Caitríona referred to, that notion that all students and teaching staff will be empowered to develop knowledge, skills and attitudes. That phrase, knowledge, skills and attitudes, aligns very directly with the development of behaviours that underpin a competency. So again, we had a natural alignment with UN strategy, as Caitríona outlines. And straight away, of course, we knew that the sustainability strategy and, if you like it, Trinity Inc. and the higher powers were very committed to and familiar with the notion of sustainable development within planetary boundaries. So effectively, the fellows were given a blank page, and the blank page it only included that notion of every student within discipline and interdisciplinary. And we sort of came up with a nominal 10-point plan, one plan of which was that enabling students and staff to have the opportunities to develop requires some element of a sort of an outline, exemplar, novice module. And at the July meeting with the broader steering group, we proposed an outline of a module that would bring the interdisciplinary expertise of the existing 5 fellows in the context of what we're outlining here at the blocks, would be aimed at developing the key UNESCO competencies. And we chose the UNESCO competencies almost to keep that alignment going, not taking from other competency frameworks on the market or available out there. The preferred pedagogical approaches, we do try to take a learner-centered approach, but it was to be explicit in this. There would be action in it. So each of the blocks as outlined would include 2 lectures, but also a 2-hour interactive small group teaching workshop aimed at enabling the students to develop and demonstrate the relevant competencies. And of course, the whole thing aiming to foster transformative learning. As Caitríona outlines, the cake model has been retained by Trinity. And as fellows in those early days, we felt very strongly that if you didn't have a functioning biosphere and a partnership approach, which of course is SDG 17, then inevitably any concepts related to society and economy were going to struggle anyway. So that was our visualization of how the themes in the SDGs would be integrated. And of course, to keep the graduate attributes first and foremost, we aligned them with the learning outcomes of our notional module. And that steering group encouraged us to prioritize development of and piloting of this module. So by October, and the student interns joining us, they actively became involved in designing workshops that would speak to and achieve the real challenging aims of competency development, particularly related to block 3, 4, and 5. And we were adamant that we would beta test these with volunteer staff and students. And the students, our student interns, not only developed the key cases with us, but also led those beta testing workshops to prove that it could be done. And then to pilot it between May and mid-July, we rolled it out, as it were, as an experiential learning approach for staff. And Caitríona had mentioned 40 academic staff, but within this photo taken mid-July, I'm looking at librarians, I'm looking at, of course, the circle in the middle is Nora, absolutely ready to take on the challenge that would be, but also 4 other staff from the School of Business attended that, and 5 of Declan's team of workshop leaders. So they were ready to think about rollout in the forthcoming September. And yes, I'm realizing I have a star around Jane Hackett there, and she deserves it because the leadership example of someone in that position making time to be one of those that was at every one of the 2.5-hour in-person sessions between late May and July. So it gives you a sense that none of these things succeed in isolation. We're well aware it takes leadership from bottom up and leadership from the top. So of course that wasn't the end job for Nora and her team and the workshop leaders, because of course material has to be adapted for the discipline and the level of your students. So we knew from beta testing that, for example, a title such as the nitrogen cycle as a slide or a concept beginning a lecture for 600 or 560 business students in their first few weeks could be intimidating. And I'd add that it could be intimidating for staff who don't STEM, from the sciences as well. And this question, what is the most abundant chemical in the atmosphere? Well, I had the privilege of being in that 600 theatre as Nora delivered the lectures. And I'm going to share with you a couple of what I thought were absolutely magic adaptations from within the context of discipline of business, but also Nora's expertise is food marketing. It's one of her sort of niche, real passion areas. And of course, she had props with her and mic'd up, and she talked about anybody eat crisps. And then maybe the healthier ones, anybody eats salad bags. And when you get them from the supermarket, they're nice and fresh. And when you pop them, what comes out is nitrogen. So she had quickly captured the students from where they started, a student-centered approach. And she was already talking about the science and not necessarily carbon, which maybe we've been totally focused on in the past. And then she went a step further because, like, my hobby is horticulture, gardening, and she didn't talk about legumes and conversion of nitrogen down in the soil. She talked about shamrocks, and of course she immediately linked us not just to agriculture but to culture. So the ability, I appreciate, she is particularly capable, confident, courageous lady, but she was delivering to nearly 600 people in the room, several of us staff, and she managed to contextualize it. So it really gave me encouragement that we can do similarly, regardless of our background. One other example I'll share with you from me sitting there listening was her putting a couple of water bottles up there. And of course, that allowed her to begin to talk about water as a key internal dimension in Kate Rawwood's work, which we're all probably familiar with. And the notion that food, water, health and energy are sort of the core ones. And then she quickly moved to the point that, but it's in a package. And what does that mean? And is packaging and business and sort of the economy as we see it, what are the implications of that? Is it a closed system or is it an open system? And then she quickly moved on to the notion that actually one of the bottles came from one side of the world and came here, and something we produce here is going to another side of the world. And what additional issues arise with that? So she was talking about globalization. Before they knew it, the audience, the learners were contextualized in business, but thinking about complex systems thinking, the impact of unnecessary waste, the impact of unnecessary transport, and the notion that everything affects the biosphere. And they're just the first couple of examples. It was a wonderful experience to be there and to be in the workshops with her workshop leaders. So to give you some of the preliminary findings, and of course, really this will be revisited from mid-June onwards when things quieten down a bit. Some extracts from the module descriptor is supplied to the students. You'll see that the language of science, of ecology, of psychosocial, it's all in there, the language of planetary boundaries and social foundations. And you think that should almost sort of give staff sort of a concern about whether this really is feasible. And a standard question in Trinity for student feedback in the Trinity Business School is overall I found this module. And you can see that the response is overwhelmingly very satisfactory from the students' point of view, with a response rate of over 300 students, an anonymous survey, non-compulsory, and provided after most of them had their grades already. So well done, School of Business. Another question typically asked is, please list up to 3 things which you enjoyed about this module. And if I just pick out one from that left-hand side of the screen, it really opened up your eyes to how interconnected all these systems are: economics, climate change, and business. So they were already seeing the connections, that it's a system, and that it was situated in their chosen discipline of business, but they had to engage with it all. And the final question, I've taken a few extracts from the pages of feedback available to the School of Business, was to talk about lectures, workshops, and activities found most interesting or valuable. And one quote was visual modules such as donut economics and planetary boundaries graphs. So these are business students, and we're talking about fairly detailed concepts in their first 2 weeks in Trinity, when actually their entry to Trinity was even delayed by 2 weeks, that they could internalize that in a way that they knew it was linked to overshoot and planetary limits in a very constructive way. Another one I loved to see was that the workshops were appreciated for debates on real world examples. So if you're going to get action-oriented learning likely to foster transformative change and transformative learning, you got to get peer interaction and debate, and the setup of the workshops to do that. They've specifically mentioned mining in the Congo and immigration, and they were our student-led concepts for the workshops in Block 3 and Block 4. So there we have first-year students just making that link straight away. And Block 5, the mention of misinformation and disinformation was memorable, and that this student will always think how easy it is for companies to give us misinformation. So talk about a way of feeding back to the School of Business that yes, critical thinking, systems analysis, framing, etc. is all there. And of course, I know before I leave, many of you are thinking, oh, but assessment, how would you do that? And we could talk for 20 minutes on the things we tried and trialed. But the assessment overview has 2 components. One is 35% of the module marks, an in-person multiple choice test. And each of the 5 workshops delivered to every student in a group of no more than 17, led by a trained facilitator, accounted for 13% of the marks. 8%, had they done their pre-work? Did they actively engage in the debates? Did they present when they were required to, etc.? And 5% with each workshop was aligned with a 500-word response to prompt questions related to it, uploaded very quickly after the session finished. And yes, all of these are draft, they're preliminary findings. Hopefully when things calm down for Nora and the team, we regroup in June, and she certainly with her team intends saying, okay, what do we learn for that? How can we do even better for the 5 programs in the School of Business and their new cohort of students in September? I hope I've done justice to Trinity Business School there. It's been a wonderful journey for the first 2 years of the project. Caitríona has outlined we're moving on to additional and new ways of doing things. Nora's and my email addresses are there. And thanks again to the multiple students and staff who were involved and continue to be involved on this journey with you. And not forgetting, of course, the SATL funding, without whom we couldn't have done it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecily. I know we're going to have a little time for comments and questions later. Thanks again for that. So John, we'll go over to you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Gallagher. I'm in this School of Engineering and here as a fellow in ESD. And I'm going to talk about, I suppose, our ESD journey and trying to actually quantify how we're doing in our current university operations, in our undergrad and postgrad programs, and then how do we build on that with the exemplar case that Cecily has just presented, and how we can move forward. So just in terms of what I'm going to run through over the next 10 minutes approximately, I suppose the importance of tracking, of mapping. Many of you from other institutes have taken this journey, and I enjoy the conversations I've had with people at national events around this, and Trinity are on that journey now. Maybe just to actually give you insights briefly on our strategic objectives and recommendations, which actually part of this mapping supports, and then measuring a baseline both with respect to meeting these objectives and also informing the direction that we take going forward. And going forward, I suppose there's the top-down approach to how we map, but also there's the bottom-up that we need to take to help our academic colleagues make change, embed ESD, and support through CAP. So if you're maybe all familiar, or some of you are familiar with the Advanced Higher Education documentation. This is a 2023 report, and I just want to, I suppose, position the role of mapping in two ways. One, from an institutional standpoint, and its value of quality assurance to some degree, but essentially understanding how, as an institute, you are doing, and that's quite important. But on the other side, from a bottom-up perspective, how are we doing as individuals? How I can think of this as myself with regards to my ownership of modules, my courses that I'm have responsibility for. So also there is that different layers of value to mapping ESD within a module, program, or curriculum. And really, at the end of the day, it's about how do we connect these things? How do we support our strategic objectives, both at a university level and indeed at a national level as an institute within requiring to support the HEA objectives. So therefore, really, I kind of want to bring you to where we set out our university's goals, both for undergraduate and, on the subsequent side, postgraduate, and then lead you into some of the mapping approaches that we're adopting. So I won't go through the text in great detail, but really what we've done in our sustainability strategy in the university that has been outlined by Caitríona earlier, and indeed by setting objectives for our HEA framework, is committing to addressing ESD within our modules and programs, therefore our programs. And we've set goals of the number of students that will engage in that. The previous example from Cecily in the module, very much addressing that. But our ambition is to obviously go much further. So from an undergraduate perspective, we've set out these commitments, and in a similar way, we want to also look at our postgraduate, both taught and research. We cannot leave any part of our student body behind in this respect, and also a same end goal of addressing ESD themes and developing competencies for sustainability in both. So we are now on the journey of setting a baseline, quantifying how we're doing, and to bring back to Caitríona's visual around our framework, our mapping system very much speaks to this. As I said earlier, we're learning from other national institutes, and indeed we have people here from outside Ireland as well. We are looking at the landscape of how you've done it, and we feel that there are some excellent methodologies out there that we can adopt. So, and I think what is very common as with regards to the ESD themes is that the SDGs are a very good starting point, and everyone has adopted different methodological approaches, using keywords or leveraging AI in 2025 being quite common. And these are the kind of methods that we're exploring as to what is the best. We've had previous exercises exploring the undergraduate curriculum. Now it's also about doing this for the postgraduate curriculum. But I suppose it's been a journey as well, as indeed I'm sure all of you have experienced, but where do you find the evidence? Where is this information? Module descriptors is one, program handbooks, etc. And what we found over the process is that there's a range of gatekeepers to this information, and perhaps every institute is different with regards to that. Module coordinators, course directors, and indeed professional staff within our services in college are extremely important as part of this, because we may be the gatekeepers to the educational piece as module coordinators, but professional staff are extremely important in how they support us in delivering it. And Cecily would have mentioned librarians. They play a really valuable role in how we achieve ESD by providing the resources that we need. So there's a range of stakeholders or gatekeepers, as they're referred to, and indeed sources of information that are all somewhat different. So our framework that we're in the process of applying is embracing this framework of themes, competencies aligned with themes, obviously the pedagogical approaches outlined by UNESCO, and then also a range of teaching, learning and assessment strategies to complement that. And the question is, how do we do this? And many other methodologies adopt the idea of the strength of SDGs within a module being somewhat a way to quantify whether a module and then indeed a student is attaining the ESD, and is it truly embedded in the module. And really, from that starting point, at the end, what we're all trying to do is ensure that the student journey, which is really what we should be thinking about, each and individual student and their journey, that their program or curriculum that they take over their one or several years, depending on if it's undergraduate or postgraduate of studies, that they're exposed and that ESD has been embedded in their program. And it can be achieved through different mixes of these three. So there is no right score for ESD within a module. But what we're trying to do is determine how it puts together. But I want to focus just for one moment on particular in a piece that we feel is quite important, and that is the SDG cake that's been mentioned already by two previous speakers. The SDGs are very important, but the question is, if we only address one SDG within a module, are we really promoting systems thinking in the way that we possibly could? Is there a way in which each of the layers of the cake and the partnerships can be intertwined in some way within a module that supports competency development or enhanced competency development within a module without taking maybe away the core subject matter or the content of a module, but enhance it? So for me, I just want to highlight that the cake plays an important role in our methods for mapping. SDGs are still very evident in this, but to develop the competencies and pedagogical approaches, it's the interactions and the connectivity between the SDGs that are actually important to help with that narrative. So informing direction, very briefly, it is important to look at that this is also an exercise that can support the goals of the university, and bringing this information together helps us obviously with reporting for HEA, but sustainability is a rankings related matter, and that's an important piece. Continuous improvement, always providing a baseline and mapping always helps, and can support areas like professional development. It can extract best practice. We can help us identify who is doing a really good job, and that can really help then develop inspirational resources. Obviously, we're looking to try to do this in an efficient manner, as I'm sure many colleagues from other institutes have found this process extremely challenging and time consuming, but that's why working with professional staff as well as academics, there's different ways to access the resources that is a module descriptor, a program handbook. We're looking at providing a transparent methodology that can then be adopted by students, visible to staff about how we evaluate our modules and ensure ESD is embedded. And indeed, as we all are here today, our ESD activities, we want to increase our visibility that we're doing this and supporting ESD ambitions at an institutional level, but also nationally. So really, just lastly, I suppose, top down and bottom up. We are looking at this mapping exercise from a top-down perspective at present, but we do want to look at a bottom-up that supports in a different manner. Obviously, everything around our modules, our programs, if we're asked to do something else, it's a workload that we're asking to hand over to academic partners or academic community. So finding a way that avoids this workload is extremely important, but they are still part of the important part of the input to the process. Doing it top down also has a harmonized approach, but again, we have hundreds of programs, thousands of modules to address. So doing it one by one is extremely hard and challenging, as indeed some institutes have taken that route, and it's to be congratulated, but it's really quite an arduous task. And at the end of the day, the outputs are as good as the inputs. So the exercise of adopting AI, or indeed engaging with individual module coordinators or course directors, there is challenges, and so there is a quality assurance piece that we need to address. So from a bottom-up perspective, with new ESD fellows joining, like Kushla, who wants to engage with more actively with the students as well as academic staff, there's an important way to embed ESD and showing how to map or how to evaluate your module in this way will really, I suppose, improve communication and hopefully enhance the level of support within the academic community of what we're trying to achieve. And at the end of the day, helping capturing the range of ways that Trinity academics can meet these objectives is really important. We're all going to have strengths in our current curriculum or curricula around ESD, but how else can we do it? It could be about more ESD themes, it could be about enhancing competencies, pedagogical approaches, etc. So our starting point for each program, for each module is different, so we need to support academics in different ways. So really that's an overview. We're now in the process of undertaking our mapping, and we look forward to sharing the findings in due course and having discussions at future events. So Claire, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much for that, John. Thank you. And we'll move to Jonathan. Jonathan, you're here. I'm reminded of the interdisciplinary nature of our team and how fortunate we are to have the mix of disciplinary backgrounds here. And we have STEM, but we also have music component here from Creative Arts. So Jonathan, I'll hand over to you and let you share there.
Thanks a million, Claire. Yeah, thanks, folks. Yeah, it's I'm just sharing some details here about a module I convene in the music department in the School of Creative Arts. It's called Music and Climate, and it's been running since 2022-23. It's a 5-credit course that's available to seniors officers and visiting students. The number of students is relatively small, so it's always between 11 and 13 or so. And this has turned into a feature rather than a bug. It's allowed me to adopt a teaching model that's built around discussion and debate, with a particular focus as well on iterative assessment and continuous feedback. So the core aim of the module really is to explore the intersections between music and climate change. It's structured around 3 principal threads. So first we look at the music industry's operational response to climate change. We look at sustainability policies at music festivals, green touring practices as well, and innovation in venue management. And then second, we analyze musical representations of environmental change. So we look at really overt examples like protest songs that lament ecological loss, and then pieces that are a bit more abstract, experimental works that evoke planetary instability. And then third, we examine the carbon footprint of the music industry itself. We look at the impacts of vinyls and CDs and cassettes, and now most recently streaming. So the module is really intended to equip students with the kind of industry-specific knowledge that may be valuable to them should they pursue a career in music. So that includes understanding existing sustainability practices, but also being able to identify gaps as well where future innovation might take place. It's not about training activists by any means or ideologues or anything like that. An informed graduate is the key goal, someone who can draw conclusions based on the best evidence available. So in terms of implementation, then the module actually wasn't initially designed with the SDGs in mind, but it naturally ended up aligning with several of them. So quality education's quite obvious. It's not just the case of the students learning about sustainability. They're supposed to assess how music can serve as a force for environmental awareness and cultural change, and also assess its limitations as well. What's it not capable of as well? The 13th SDG, climate action, is obviously central to it. Finally, then there's SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. That's explored in quite a bit of depth. We look at how music is produced and consumed. We look at the environmental cost of physical media and data centers now as well. The module uses that wedding cake model, where the SDGs are tiered and arranged into categories. And we look at how ecological, societal, and economic dimensions interact with the music ecosystem. So you're looking at biospheric, and then the cultural values, culture and values tier, and then the economic tier as well. So in terms of the ESD competencies that the UNESCO ESD competencies, the module cultivates a few. There's systems thinking. That's embedded in the eco-critical tools that the students use to assess how music interacts with multiple different systems. One concept I've been keen to promote is the idea of music industries. It's not so much that music is this monolithic industry. It's an activity that engages with multiple different types of industry. There's then anticipatory and normative competencies as well. They're engaged when students explore the ethical dilemmas of musical consumption. I took inspiration here from that terrific ESD module that was run by the team there in the first term. There was this wonderful class where there was ethical sort of scenarios put to the students, and then they had to decide then from a series of options what the most ethical choice was in the context of the scenario. So I was able to adapt that in music and climate. It was very good. Strategic competency as well. There's critical thinking that's foundational throughout, especially in one of the assessment components in the vivas, the mini vivas that run towards the end of the term. That's where students have to defend their arguments dynamically and think on their feet. And self-awareness and collaboration. I try to work in as much discussion as possible, so I'll have these Socratic seminars as the second half of the lecture, and that encourages obviously a lot of group dialogue and gets them to reflect and develop their communication skills in groups. So in terms of the teaching and assessment strategy then, again, as I mentioned earlier on, the idea was that it'd be very iterative so that each assessment component would lead into the next. So the first thing they do is submit a 100-word essay proposal. Early in the term, it's just 5%. It gets them thinking early, and it gets me to tailor feedback to their interests. And then they do a short presentation, then allows them to test their ideas out in a time-bound environment. They develop argumentation and communication skills. And then I give them a bit of feedback, and then later on, a couple of weeks later, they submit the essay, 1,200 words. And that obviously requires quite sustained critical engagement and an integration of the module content. And then in week 12, then there's a Viva exam of work 20%. So it gets them to speak about their work fluently and refine their arguments and respond with follow-up questions as well. So the idea is that they're always interacting with the feedback they're given. Each assessment, as I said, builds on the last. They have access to marking rubrics. It gives them recommended readings, writing guides, all via Blackboard. The peer discussions, I think, really help them. They were given a reading to do each week, and because it's a small class, they know the spotlight is going to be on them at some point, so they do the readings, which is terrific. The class size has really been vital here. I get to know them by name as well, and I think they feel heard each week because there's enough time to pause and listen to what each of them have to say. So in terms of evaluation, this year would have been the third time it's run. Unfortunately, the first 2 years it ran, I wasn't able to get as much formal feedback as I might like, partly due to the timing of the institutional surveys. But the informal feedback has been very rich. They've told me they found it really enjoyable and eye-opening as well, especially as regards the hidden environmental costs of streaming. I think they associated streaming with being quite green, and then they find out that its emissions are actually higher than previous media for listening to music. The engagement's very high, the attendance very good. It's regularly up at or near 100%. The participation's very robust as well. I think as well there's some contextual factors involved here. The timing of the module I think is significant. It actually clashes with another module. So there's very few students end up doing this module relative to the number that could take it. So And it's it's a 4th-year module as well. The students are nearing graduation, and there's a diversity of content in it as well. It draws in students with interests ranging from performance to environmental science, caters to a whole bunch of different interests. I had a lot of first class students in the first year I ran it. It was an exceptional group overall. What helped me separate them then last year and now this year was the Viva. That really helped add a bit of nuance. You could see the students who could really apply the knowledge flexibly and do it under pressure. So it's a format I really want to keep. I tell them as well as 4th years that it's quite similar to interviews that they'll end up doing. So it has some real world relevance as well. So just, I suppose, to sell music as a viable way of introducing ESD into the curriculum, it sits at a fascinating crossroads. I find it draws from the humanities, so there's textual and historical analysis. There's business as well. We look at industry practices and entrepreneurship, and there's also STEM as well via the engineering of instruments and production software, and now data-driven streaming platforms. So it's a one-stop shop, so to speak. It's an inherently multidisciplinary field that allows students from a lot of different backgrounds to enter into a discussion about sustainability, often from very unexpected angles. So in the classroom, this means that one student might approach climate change through the artistic expression, and then another might look at it through technological innovation, and then another might look at it through economic critique. So all of them can find a place at the table, and all these diverse knowledge systems can meet on an equal footing. So one last thought, folks, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Mark, I'm handing back to you at this point. We've heard from all of our 4 speakers, and I can see there's a couple of queries in. So,
yeah, thanks, Claire. That was great. Thanks to everybody for taking the time to prepare and present. One of the main questions, one that's asked every week, is are you open to sharing the presentations? So if you are, that'd be great. We can put them up on the National Resource Hub. A couple of questions just jumped to mind that I might sort of feel, we'll go in reverse order. Jonathan, that was great. Really loved the module. You mentioned that it was a 4th-year module. Like, is there any opportunities or plans of maybe introducing these concepts earlier in the program that you can sort of build on, so that it isn't coming towards the end, maybe when students are making strategic chances or strategic decisions because they're graduating quite soon?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. We did actually look into that and moving things around in the curriculum. There was a lot of interest in trying to find space for the big ESD module that was mentioned earlier on, and could we map that onto music? And the likelihood would be that it would be compulsory, so it would be for the 1st years or 2nd years, and then you might have a deeper dive then for the 4th years, that looks at really specific areas. Now that's obviously a big curriculum question, and it's something that will probably come up in the next couple of years. No immediate plans, but it was definitely talked about how to get that ESD module in earlier and have it be something that all the students are exposed to.
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. At least it's been discussed, but I suppose without your module to sort of catalyze that discussion. So this is an example, I suppose, of where a really innovative module can sort of catalyze more discussion more broadly against the whole curriculum. So yeah, it's fantastic. Another question just for Cecily maybe, and it's a thing that sort of jumped out at obviously I'd be quite familiar with the work that's gone on in business. But what strikes me is the approach that you took. It was an interdisciplinary approach for an interdisciplinary module, and I think you might want to comment on that, because sometimes that's sort of missed. People try to do an interdisciplinary module within a discipline without bringing in students, staff from other disciplines, professional development staff, librarians, and so on.
I think you're hitting on a core challenge there, Mark. I've worked with our Centre of Academic Practice since 2016. And typically, traditionally, we've been looking at pedagogical approaches, I call it teaching practices, assessment practices. But the academic or the teacher is deriving the content from their own discipline. I think what is unique and hugely challenging about ESD is that you're both trying to use very adventurous, in some people's minds, teaching approaches with material that you also have to upskill on. I admire, and I shouldn't need to use a word like that, I admire Trinity's commitment to both staff and students to enable them to upskill in recognition of that type of challenge. So I think that's one piece of it. And when we ran the pilot module for staff, we wanted the staff to experience the 5 workshops as students, but we had an add-on, 2 extra sessions and a half an hour with each session around the teaching practices that underpinned it and how they aligned with being student-centered, action-oriented learning and fostering transformative learning. However, Nora Campbell worked really hard last August to go back through the staff development module content to really try and customize it to the bigger discipline of business and to be able to talk about concepts from within her own expertise. And I mentioned it's food and food marketing, etc. So there is a big commitment in that. And I think that is absolutely ideal. What Trinity is also encouraging, and what we're seeing from other pairings of the staff that did, we've run 2 versions of that module now, is perhaps the 2 come together. And one has, we typically see that the arts and humanities might struggle with some of the scientific content and discipline. And without that, you really can't internalize and understand planetary boundaries. And likewise, Kay Rawford's works and the kind of whole eco-justice and all of that, very much someone in a purely scientific discipline might be best supported by somebody with some of that expertise. So we're certainly promoting that as a way of thinking and a way of being across Trinity. Now, I see Claire nodding there. I don't know if you want to add anything. Have I given sort of a fair, okay, that's where we were in 2024. And Nora was a particular specimen, which also had a particularly big group, let's be honest. And maybe there's more than one way it'll be framed in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Claire, do you want to jump in on that before we pose a question to John that's in the chat?
Oh, no, I couldn't put it better at all. And thank you, Cecily, for that. Yeah, I think it just probably perhaps also underlines disciplinary difference, you know, as long as, you know, where we're customizing and we're looking at how different disciplines will respond to this. But yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks, Claire. John, just a question in the chat there about the mapping process, if you could sort of expand on that a little bit. Yes,
I guess I'll try to keep it brief, but I suppose if every student is taking a journey, it's the sum of its parts, and those parts being modules. So how we are mapping is firstly at a module level, because that is the content that's more accessible to us, learning outcomes, an overview of module content, learning, teaching assessment methods, etc. So at the moment, we have a Excel-based tool to capture that information. At the moment, we're doing it kind of with a combination of manual processes and then exploring the AI route to test how good, bad, and ugly AI can be, and that it can be good and bad and ugly depending on how you provide inputs. And so in doing so, it's allowing us to, I suppose, identify where modules are very clear and transparent that a certain SDG linked to an ESD theme or a certain competency, which is a bit more difficult to extract, and certain teaching and learning methods or assessment methods are in place. But I think I said it during it, what I've learned is it's as good as the module descriptor is prepared. That's been very insightful. And just on the previous point, every discipline has certain ways of presenting their modules and the language they use. So that's why other studies have used keyword searches, very expansive libraries, because of the differences in disciplines. But we will expect different disciplines have strengths and weaknesses with regards to ESD themes, for example. And hopefully then it's about how we take the mapping results, identify strengths across college, and then leverage those strengths to support one another. But really it's an Excel-based tool at present, but we can happily share it in due course when it's more advanced, but there's some great tools out there already.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think there's a national conversation to be had around the baseline piece, actually, and to bring people together. So we might look at doing that in the next semester, because it's a really good discussion to have, and not to make it a competitive thing, but to sort of share the resources so people can work with each other on it to have a sort of national picture. So that's great. So we're coming up to finishing time. Just a point I wanted to raise as well, and it came up in Caitríona's presentation initially and in subsequent presentations, was the importance of the commitment that's at a strategic level in Trinity, and everything sort of flows from that, and the connections that Trinity in their presentations today demonstrated through their linkage to their own strategic objectives, but also to the national ESD strategy and the HEA performance framework. So all of those linkages and connections are sort of really important when you're trying to look at this holistically, which Trinity are trying to do. So that was great, wonderful presentations. Thanks very much, all of you, for taking the time, as I said, to prepare and present today. We hope to have the recordings up early next week for people that have registered but couldn't make it today. So thanks to everybody, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much, Mark and colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks a million, everyone.